This video covers how to replace a fuel pump in a Ford Mustang. This is a GT 2003, but the same principles will apply on almost any vehicle, make, model or body style. So this video we're going to go through a diagnosis first before we replace it, just so we can talk about a few of the things that can go wrong with a fuel pump. And maybe it's not your fuel pump, maybe it's something else like the shut-off switch or a fuse or anything like that. So for diagnosis we're going to just use a standard multimeter. And to do the actual job itself we need one special tool. This is a fuel line removal tool. And again, for all parts I'm using in this video I'm going to link in the description below, so check those out. So signs of a bad fuel pump: it will crank but it won't start. Just do that forever. Another sign of a bad fuel pump: put the key in the on position. You should hear a humming sound, and that is the fuel pump priming the fuel. If you don't hear a humming sound, it's a good indication you might have a bad fuel pump. Okay, coming into the trunk of the car, remove these wing nuts. This is on the driver's side. Behind the trim here you'll see a fuel inertia switch, a fuel cutoff switch. What happens here, you get in an accident, for example, someone might T-bone you, this will pop out and it's a safety precaution so you're not still pumping gas in an accident. Sometimes when you go over a pothole this button might come out. If so, just push it down and make sure it's in the down position, then fuel can flow freely. If that doesn't fix the problem, then it could be a fuse. Now there's a fuse relay, which could also be bad. It's located inside the CCRM, which lives behind the passenger side fender. On the older model Mustang, it's actually in the passenger floor compartment. So it does vary, but I'll show you that right now in another video where I took the fender off. Okay, now everything's off. You've got some cool access points. You've got the CCRM. However, as the fuel relay is inside the CCRM, we can actually check the fuse for the CCRM. It's this one right here. It's the 20 amp fuse on the end. Make sure that the fuse is okay just by examining it and check for breakages. Also check for the voltage within the pins here where the fuse is sitting. So just put a probe in each hole and check for around 12 volts. If that's okay, we'll check this electrical harness on the fuel pump. So just grab a standard multimeter and come underneath the rear of the car. Okay, this is the electrical harness we're testing here. This goes to the fuel pump. It's right next to the fuel tank right here, right at the back of the car. We're just going to unplug this and check to see if we're roughly getting voltage to it. So with the harness disconnected here, just press on the tab to do that, very easy. And this part comes out, this goes off to the fuel pump, so this is the side we're testing. Get your multimeter and set it to DC volts. Ground off the black cable. I've just put it in this little harness by the exhaust there. The probe just fits in nicely. Then we can just use the positive one here to probe the harness. So what we're doing here, we're just testing every pin. I don't have a pin-out diagram, but you can, see if you're getting voltage on these pins. Once your multimeter is all set up, just put the key in the run position. This will give voltage to the fuel pump harness. As you can see here, we're getting voltage on a lot of these pins. That's the second one, third one. So it does look like we're getting voltage to the fuel pump. We've checked the inertia switch, the fuse. It's safe to say in this case it could be a bad fuel pump. So what we're going to do now is drop the tank, replace the fuel pump. So the first thing we need to do is depressurize all the fuel lines. The easiest way to do that, just get a rubber mallet here and just tap the inertia switch. That's what it's designed to do. It will tap out, and now we're going to start the car and relieve all the pressure. Now start the car and just let it run until it dies. That will take all the fuel out the lines in the system. I don't need to do that because mine just naturally died one day and I towed the car home. So I'm good to go. So before working on pretty much anything to do with the fuel system, disconnect the negative terminal from the battery. The last thing we want to do is generate any kind of spark or anything like that when dealing with fuel. Okay, we're good to go. Before we jack the car up and place it on jack stands, we're going to chock the front wheels off. That prevents the car from rolling. Once we've done that, we'll put the jack stands under the body of the car. You can probably also use the rear axle as a jack stand point if you wish. Now if you have gas in the tank, it's important we get almost all of it out of there. You can use a crappy pump such as this, they're really cheap. I'll link it in the description below. So this is the idea if you haven't done it before. Straight edge down there, that into a container and just start pumping. You might want a better pump, but you can do it with anything, it really doesn't matter. The reason we want to get most of the gas out, one, the tank's going to be quite heavy otherwise, and two, if you generate any kind of spark, dropping a wrench, an old school workshop light or anything like that, you don't want a big fire. So it's very important you do this. So in the gas cap here, 3 10mm bolts, it holds the filler neck assembly in and sort of bolts it to the body there. Okay, once removed, just set them aside. Okay, underneath the car, very easy to access. Undo this electrical harness here, it's just this little tab on the end, just push it upwards, and it'll just slide right out. The next thing we need to do is disconnect this half harness from the body of the car. So it's just a case of getting a flathead in here and just prying it sort of out like that, because this will come down with the tank. So that's just what we're aiming for with the electrical connector. Going on the left side of the tank, disconnect a couple lines here. This one very easy, you just sort of slowly twist it off and pull it out here, it separates right here. Okay, so coming behind this vent hose here, you can just pull this out, it's kind of in the way. You just press in this little tab here on the back and it pulls right out, that's sand in there. And then you can get access to this one right here. So this connector, just get a screwdriver, put it in here and just twist it right to left. This whole yellow part should slide all the way out that way. Once the yellow part comes out, this will just pull off. So this is what that yellow clip looks like when you pull it out. Sometimes they might snap, you know, it's an older car now, especially if you live in a hot climate, so do your best. If not, you know, maybe glue it with epoxy or get another one. Now we're on the back side of the tank now, so that's more under the car. There's a connector here, it's right in the middle. Just pinch the sides in. It might snap, and then it'll just pull right off. So it's very dry here, you can see I snapped the tabs off, but it doesn't matter that much, it's got a really nice fit on there. It just comes out like that. And that goes off to the fuel filter, which is right here, and that filters the fuel, gets all the little nasty particles out so your fuel injectors don't get clogged. And I do recommend replacing the fuel filter while you're doing this job. They're very cheap, $6-7, something like that, and it's something that needs replacing every few thousand miles, maybe around 40,000, something like that. However, to remove the fuel filter, it's just doing what we're about to do now twice. So you do it here, disconnect it, and obviously undo this cable tie that holds it in place. It's very easy, but we will be disconnecting this left-hand one here, so it's just a case of taking this metal bracket off. That's to make sure the fuel line doesn't disconnect while you're driving. So just get a flat head in there, it comes right off. Now to remove this connector, you need a special tool. It's a fuel filter removal tool. So here's the fuel filter removal tool. It's quite crude and simple. The idea is you get this on the fuel line here, and then pull the fuel line fitting towards it, and then bring it off afterwards. That's sort of how it works. So my tool is just the bigger end, so we're just going to put it here, just like that. We're going to take this fuel line here and move it this way towards the tool, that way, and then it'll just fall off together. So that's sort of how it works, very easy. Don't get your tool and try and go that way, it won't work. There's a lip in the way, it's not designed to do like that. So what we're going to do, put the tool here, bring this way, and send it off to the left. Okay, so we've just disconnected the fuel line. If you didn't relieve the pressure before, then this is where you're going to have a fuel explosion, and probably won't be a very pretty sight actually. So make sure you're wearing crappy clothes. So disconnected that. So the last part we're going to do is the filler neck assembly. So we're coming up here. This is how we fill our gas tank at the gas pump. So it's bolted to the bracket of the fuel tank with an 8mm bolt here. We're going to take that out, and it goes into the tank through this rubber grommet right here. Now when you pull the filler neck out of the tank that way, this grommet, it tends to destroy itself, crack, and it's recommended, that even the service manual states that you need to get a new grommet, which looks like this, about $8, quite cheap. And that way, if it does crack, which it probably will, you're ready, and you don't need to have the gas tank down on the floor while you source one of these halfway through a job. So I do recommend getting one of these fast. I've just taken the 8mm bolt out here, just set that aside. So on the filler neck side now, we're just going to disconnect this vent hose right here. It just pulls out of this rubber part. You can see there's 3 here. Here's the filler neck, and there's 2 more right here. So we're just going to disconnect this one. And there's one more up here. You can just see there's the end of the clip here. So what we need to do is just push these clips through this side. So what you can do, you just get your finger and push these this way. That'll just create a hole at the back where you can get a flathead in and just pull this tab all the way out. It's similar to the yellow one over the other side. So this is what it looks like when it comes out, very similar to the yellow one from before. So now that clip's out, we can just take this line and pull it free. So this is what we're looking like now. We've just connected these two. We've just got the filler neck to go. Okay, so I'm just getting my jack ready. This is like a fuel tank jack, transmission jack. It's pretty cool. You can use the ratchet strap, but a standard car jack will be fine. Just use a plank of wood and be wary with it. As long as the tank's empty, a standard jack should be fine. So I've just got my jack positioned under the tank there, slightly off to the left because the filler hose is still connected as we lower it down. So we're going to try and lower it at an angle like this, with the passenger side higher than the driver's side. So now we're going to remove these straps and actually lower the fuel tank. If you look on the left here, this one doesn't have a bolt in, it has a swing mechanism. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the left one, the one at the back here. It's a 13mm bolt. So that's right there. So if you took off the left strap there, you can just sort of leave it there or wherever you want, and it'll just swing out the way. Last chance to reposition the jack now. It was there before just to make sure we had adequate sort of support there for when we took the strap off. Looks nice and sturdy. So if you want, you can move it to the left here, because we're going to lower this at an angle as the filler neck is still attached to the tank. So that's what we're going to do now, and then we're going to remove this strap here. It has the 30mm on the front and also one on the back. So we're going to take both of those off now. Now all 3 13mm bolts are removed, we're going to lower the tank. So the strap, that kind of just lives with it, that will come down with it on that side. If you look on top of the tank, there's some industrial black glue here. You can just sort of pry that off with your fingers, and that's probably what's still holding it up there. So just get your fingers in there and sort of just pry it down, or get a flathead or something like that and just kind of destroy that glue connection. Then it should just pop off and start lowering down. So you can see that glue there, it's just coming away now. Lower it really slowly and check all the edges just to make sure you got all the connectors. The last thing you want is a connector to rip or break as you're lowering it down. Once the tank's low enough, you'll probably get more access to this filler neck here. So we can start trying to pull that out now. So the rubber grommet there, we're just going to slide it out from the rubber grommet. The service manual actually says to cut the rubber grommet away, so if you have a new one you can do that. It's in there pretty good. You could have done it before, but there's just not much room, so it's really up to you. But I'd take the opportunity to remove it now, because the last thing you want to do is damage the neck by lowering the tank all the way to the ground. So the filler neck's almost out. When you're pulling it out, make sure it's quite low on this side, because you'll see the far end of the gas tank there has a little lip, and it's got to clear the exhaust. So just make sure that that goes under there before you start trying to push it to the left. So here's the filler neck. Sometimes what can happen when you pull this out of the tank, this end bit here gets snapped off and put in the fuel tank. So what you can do when you take the assembly out is fish this out of the tank, and then it just clips back on the filler neck, no problem. So don't worry about that. Alright, so we've pulled it off the car now. I've dragged it in the garage. It's fully disconnected, so we can work on it a bit better, and better lighting and better temperatures. So the hardest part, definitely getting the refill neck out of there. Don't be afraid to just use a bit of grease or oil to get it out. We're going to use the exact same method to get it back in. A residual amount, perfectly fine. It's in the service manual. It's not going to harm you in any way. So the first thing we're going to do now is clean up this debris. Just use a vacuum cleaner or something, because when we remove the fuel pump assembly, the last thing we want is all these grains and stuff to get in the tank. So that's what we're going to do first. So next we're going to take off these 8mm bolts. There's 6 in total. Just going to loosen all of those, and we can pull the assembly out. So now all the 8mm are out. We're just going to come along here and just remove this electrical connector. Now there might be a lot of debris under here. The idea is you just push this part down with your finger and it pulls out. But it's so dry and rocky, you might have better luck just getting a screwdriver there and just lifting it that way and then pulling it out. It's a lot easier that way. Again, this might not have been touched since 2002. This is a 2003 Mustang, so yeah, it would be 2002 when they probably put it together. So things might be a little dry, a little stuck. It really depends, and that goes for everything on here. So once that's disconnected, we're just going to feed this electrical harness under here. You can just kind of lift it up and pull it through. And once that's through, I'm just gonna pop this one off, just like that. Now this is all free. So now we can lift the pump assembly out. So give it just one last vacuum so there's absolutely no debris there. And just get a screwdriver and slowly pry it all the way around. Don't go crazy. Just a little prise, and it will slowly start come and stick in there. You might be looking for another bolt, but it's honestly that glued on. So once you've done that, it should sort of free up, and you can lift it up there. So as you lift the assembly lid, just sort of note how the wires and tubes and things are snaked around. It just helps you put it when you put it back together. So you can see the tubes and wires sort of go off down to the bottom here and sort of work their way back onto the pump there. So you see the tabs here, this one right there and the other one on the other side. Just grab those and pull them towards each other so you can see I'm moving it inwards. Do the same on both sides at the same time, and that will free the assembly so you can lift it out. Okay, so pulling it out, just bring this tube over the lip, then that tube over that lip, and then start pulling it up. And then you'll see a couple of things. You'll see a fuel sock. That's like sort of like a filter, like a coffee filter if you will. And another thing, the float, which is on the other side. It's kind of what you see in an old toilet. I don't know if you're familiar with that in the top tank. It's this metal wire and it goes off over to the left there. So with those things, be mindful when you pull it out. There's not enough room, so let's get the sock out first by tilting it. And then you can see on the back side there's the float. So again, be mindful pulling that out. And there it is. And the float sort of tells you how much gas you have in the tank, so that's sort of what your gas gauge ties into. So that's the complete assembly right there. It's now lifted out the tank. So just take a rag and just set the pump on there. Make sure it's free of debris, it's somewhat clean. And then you can just tip it upside down and pour out any residual gas which lives with the pump. And that way it won't go over your floor or anything like that. Have a look in the tank, just make sure it's somewhat clean. If you have any debris or anything in there, it might be good to sort of clean that out. So now you have two options. If you buy the complete assembly, it's going to cost you 5 times the amount as just the pump itself. So that's really up to you. Again, if you take this apart and there is something wrong with the assembly, maybe the fuel pump went bad for a reason, maybe the sock for the canister here is ripped, then you will need to purchase those extra parts and wait on them if you only ordered the pump. However, if you ordered the complete assembly, you could just take that out, drop it in, transplant the harness, you're good to go. Really easy. This video I'm going to show you how to change the pump, so we're going to go all the way with this one, so whichever option you choose, you know how to do both. So we're going to disconnect the electrical harness here for the fuel pump. You just press in the little hole with a small screwdriver and then just pull it out. Very easy. Next we're going to take off these two bolts here. This lives on top of the pump, and that's sort of how the fuel comes in around there and down to the fuel filter. So we're going to remove this one and this one. They're slightly smaller than 5mm, but a bit more than 4.5mm. So you can either use needle nose pliers, but they're not really in that tight. So I think a 5mm will get them off just fine. And now that's removed out of the way, we've just got 3 more bolts to do. Again, we'll use the 5mm socket on those. When you take these out, just use your fingers with an extension. You don't need a wrench or anything. So there's one over there, one here, and one just hiding behind these tubes right there. Take all 3 of those out. So once those bolts are out, you can just pry the top off, just flap it to the side, and then we can pull the old pump out. And that comes out with its own sock as well. You can see it's pretty bad in there. So what you want to do, you just want to clean this out. You can use gasoline and a small brush or something like that. That'll get that right out. Gasoline's a great cleaner. So just clean that out, and we're going to replace the pump. And when you buy a pump, there's the OEM part number. At least it should be. Yeah, there we go. 9/10/2002. So it's the original pump. It's 2020 now, so this is done 18 years, so pretty good actually. You can see when I touch the sock, it's very brittle and stuff. So yeah, this pump's totally dead, so we're just going to fit the new one in now. So what I recommend doing with your new fuel pump, just test it. It takes 12 volts. So you can see here there's a positive terminal there, negative on this side. Let's connect it to a car battery. When you do this, make sure you're well clear of your fuel tank. The last thing you want is a spark anywhere near that. So we're just going to test it. Again, running a pump with no liquid, not a good idea, but just a quick tap just to test it, perfectly fine. Okay, so you can see this now. Looks good to me. So just like we tested the new part before we fit it in and refit the tank, the last thing we want to do is to fit a dead fuel pump. We're going to test the old fuel pump. When we did the diagnosis, we tested the harness up to the harness on top of the tank. But it's good just to check the old fuel pump just to make sure it is definitely the issue. So just like before, we're going to hook this up to 12 volts. I've pulled this plastic away so I can get my clips on there, and then we're going to check it with the battery. So here's the old fuel pump we've just removed. We're just going to test it. Completely dead. So we know for a fact now it's not the harness on top of the tank or anything like that. It's 100% definitely this fuel pump. So we can rest assured we put the new one in, it's going to work fine. So if you're not going with the fuel pump I recommended in the description below, and you have somewhat of a different pool pump, what they tend to do, especially aftermarket ones, is give you a different socket here. It's not the OEM socket, so what they'll do, they'll send you a harness with it, and that sort of solves that problem. But then on the other end, you have two sort of spade connectors, if you will, and then you have to tie that into these right here. Now the problem is with this, they don't have a quick disconnect. They're sort of soldered right onto the assembly lid right there. So what you have to do in that instance is cut these wires and join these together. Now I do recommend, for one, using these pass-through connectors where you can just crimp it. And then once you've done that, use heat shrink tubing on top and just use sort of like a hairdryer or a hot air gun to sort of set that. They're the only two things you need to do when joining the wires together. You can use a soldering iron, but I also would recommend the heat shrink tubing as well. I'll link these two in the description below. But for the most part, it's good to get the, as I just discussed, the OEM replacement or an aftermarket that has the OEM socket, so you don't need to do any crimping, heat shrinking, soldering, anything like that. So now it's somewhat clean in there. Now we're going to start fitting the new pump and the new sock and everything like that. So the first thing we're going to do is take this old sock off the container here. If you just flip it underneath, you can see a little tab there. We're just going to nip that with some pliers and pull out. So it just all comes out this direction. So now the old one's off. This is all in powder form because I've left it for a few days while I was waiting for parts to arrive. So old one off, clean it all out, make sure it's all clean. New one, straight on, very easy. So we're going to prepare our new pump now for installation. I've just put the black sort of rubber pieces. They might be plastic, they might be rubber, just on the top and the bottom, just like that. You can see the OEM one right here, it's very similar. Now we're just going to attach the fuel sock to the bottom of the new one, just like this. So it just presses on, very easy. And that will be included in the package. So you can see we're all fitted now. They'll come with these little metal discs. The manual probably won't discuss them at all, but they're just designed to put over this little nub here so it just doesn't fall off while in operation. So that's what they do. You can just poke that down with a flat head. Now when you're preparing your new pump, make sure there's no debris or anything like that. The last thing we want to do is put sort of foreign particles in our fuel tank. And again, if your gas is contaminated or anything like that and you need to clean the tank out, then make sure you do that. In my case, I've looked in the tank, it looks very clear, there's no debris or anything like that. I think the pump just simply failed. But in any case where there's any debris, make sure it's cleaned. You've already dropped the tank now, so it's a lot easier to do it now. So new pump in, all snug in there, just put the lid back on, then we're going to wire up the harness. So for the harness, just plug it in, should be plug and play if you get the exact same pump as this one. And then we're going to put these bolts back in on the lid to secure the cage there for the fuel pump. So if your pump came with an assembly gasket, you can go ahead and install that if you wish. I'd really be concerned if your old one has cracks and things like that. This one looks pretty good. I'll probably replace it anyway. If you want to replace it, it's pretty much you put the little prongs through the holes and that sort of seats it in place, so when you put it down into the tank it sort of stays nice and level, and then you can sort of bolt it in. So yeah, very simple. So getting this all bolted together, very simple. It's pretty much the reverse. I will say a couple of things. The nuts here, the screws, go in just sort of finger tight with a socket. Don't sort of over thread those, this can crack. Harness, very simple, connects onto the sort of OEM harness, and positive and negative, positive being the red wire. Hook all that up. I thread it through the pipe here so I don't have it dangling around the side. Very simple really. And now the final check is we're just going to check for any more debris or anything like that before we drop it into the tank. So pick it up, shake it off, make sure there's nothing in there, then we're going to start dropping it into the tank. Remember, lead with the float here, so let the float go down here through this gap here and off down that way, and then we're going to go in with the sock, and then we're going to lower it down. So once everything's down and in there, all the tubes are under the lips, the harness is under the lips, just push the whole assembly down and it should click. And that's the click sound you'll hear, and then just give it a little wiggle to make sure it's solid in there, and then we can start bolting this down. So when bolting this back down, just bolt it down in a star-cross pattern. So here, then here, then here, then here, then here, then here. Just like when putting a wheel on a car. Anything with a gasket in here, whether it be a valve cover or a fuel tank assembly gasket or anything like that, always do a star-cross pattern. It ensures nice, even sort of squishing of the gasket so there's no leaks or anything like that. Do it all finger tight, then go around it once again. So now we're going to install the fuel filler neck grommet for the tank. It's just on this end here. Just clean the area of rough debris so nothing drops in. And to install it, we're just going to get it like this and pinch it this way, just like that, and then insert it in while it's pinched, and then this should go around this seal. So just remember, this widest part is facing outwards. So pinch towards the hole and put it in. So this is the idea here. It's quite fiddly, but once you get the technique, it's okay. So to get that last bit in, I just used a plastic handle just to sort of nudge it in. It's a very solid fit, so it's quite difficult to get in. But once it's in, you're good to go. If you're one of the lucky ones with a nice condition used one that you didn't split, then good for you, you're good to go. And now we're going to install this back into the car. We're good to go. Right, before we put this back in the car, we're going to do two things, very important. First, if you disconnected this harness, make sure it's re-plugged back in. Last thing you want to do is forget to do that. And secondly, use some grease or some oil just to lube the grommet here. So this is where the filler neck goes in, and it's such a tight fit that you will run the risk of damaging the grommet. So just take a bit of oil or a bit of grease and go around the inside of the grommet here. It's in the service manual to do this, and a residual amount won't contaminate your fuel in any way. So do this around the grommet. And also put some oil or grease on the filler neck as well. And that way when we put this back in the tank, we're not going to tear the grommet or do anything we don't want to do. So these things here, we have a electrical harness if you remove that to get access to the line behind here that has the yellow clip in. We have the sort of vent hose here. That's three things. Along the front, the electrical harness, and on the back we have our fuel filter inlet. If you replaced your filter, you can do that now and hook it up both sides. We have another line right here, and coming over to the refill side, we have the lines here and right here. Once everything's secure, we'll just bolt in the refill neck back into the gas cap. Reconnect the negative terminal on the battery. Make sure the inertia switch is down. So now come inside the car and we're going to prime the new fuel pump. So if you can hear the fuel pump now, that's probably the best sound you're going to hear. It means you did a good job. Now just prime it 5-6 times. Key on, build up the pressure in the fuel lines. And then we're going to start the car. Now just start the car. Right up. So hopefully the video helped you. Maybe I'll do the ABS at some point on another video. But yeah, good luck with yours. Thanks for watching.